In 2013, someone murders 35-year-old assistant manager Larry Wells in his office at Toys R Us. A disguised knife-wielding man appears on camera stalking the store. Police must now follow the trail of surveillance footage to track down the killer. June 29, 2013, began like any other day for Larry Wells. As manager of the Toys R Us in Hamburg, New York, Larry awoke before sunrise to help prep the store, unaware this routine morning would be his last. Bernard Grutze, the admitted killer of Toys R Us manager Lawrence Wells, has been sentenced to 25 years in prison and 5 years probation. Instead of, "I don't know, he was shot. Oh my God, I don't know if he's alive." This exchange between an American Toys R Us employee and an emergency operator was the culmination of a night that should have seen a regular evening shift at a local toy store. Sadly, however, it was anything but. It was the night of June 29, 2013, in the sleepy suburban town of Hamburg, New York, and the local Toys R Us was about to experience one of their busiest hours, unloading and preparing stock for the next week. Journalist Matt Chandler, who covered the gruesome story, explains on Murdered by Morning, which you can watch for free on 9 now, that it was meant to be a night like any other. When folks woke up to the news that there had been a murder in a toy store, it was absolutely shocking, he said of the locals of the small town. Arrived at the store at 3:55 a.m., the manager would open the doors early in the morning with his keys to let the other workers in, and then he would lock the door behind him because obviously they weren't open for business yet, and he didn't want members of the public just walking around the store while they were working out the back. Scott Cashino, a detective sergeant of Hamburg Police, explained in Murdered by Morning, "I'm a kid at heart, so working at Toys R Us was more than a job. I just really loved it." And so did Larry. He took his role as someone who makes kids happy very seriously. Isaac Malete Lloyd, a former Toys R Us employee, said. At about 4:53 a.m., Anthony Armstrong, another employee, arrived at the front door of the store to start his shift and radioed Larry to let him in, which was the process for morning shifts. The last person to arrive at the store that morning was Richard Shepard at around 5 a.m., who also radioed Larry to let him in at the front, but he didn't receive any response. Shepard then proceeded to go around the side of the building where he found an open door, which surprised him as all exterior doors should have been locked at that hour. He entered the shop and after punching in, starting to stock the shelves along with his co-workers Isaac and Cindy. Since the store was so large, each of these 4 employees, along with their manager Larry, could easily go hours without seeing one another as they stocked independent sections of the shop. Suddenly, at around 5:45 a.m., an alarm started blaring across the store, startling all the workers and leading to confusion. I radioed to Larry to turn the alarm off, as we didn't know what was going on, but I didn't get any answer. So I radioed the rest of the team and asked them to try to find Larry to turn the alarm off as it was getting annoying, Mallet Lloyd recalled. Cindy was the closest to the office, so she said that she would go look for him. And the next thing I heard was her screaming. Cindy had come across Larry Wells slumped in his chair with the phone off the hook, and he was bleeding profusely from his chest, which she assumed from a gunshot wound. "It was easily the worst thing I've ever seen in my life," Mallet Lloyd said of the scene. Assuming that a shooter may still be in the building, the 4 employees rushed out of the Toys R Us and police flocked to the store and created a perimeter around it. When officers entered the room where Larry had been, they checked for a status of life and confirmed that despite his shallow breathing and enormous loss of blood, Larry was still breathing. While he was loaded into an ambulance to be taken to hospital, he died en route. I went to the hospital and found out that he had been stabbed at work. How can someone stab a person at work, at a toy store? Why would anyone do that? Larry's father, Larry Wells Sr., said. Immediately, the remaining employees at the Toys R Us were considered suspects, and all were interviewed as the prime suspects of the murder of Larry Wells. The 4 employees present had serious red flags that stood out to investigators. Mallet Lloyd was reportedly nervous and shifty while under investigation. Richard Shepard had arrived late to work with no concrete alibi. Cindy had been the first to find Larry, and Anthony Armstrong was the least cooperative of the group, refusing to answer questions and acting strangely. But there was one piece of evidence that investigators knew they could rely on to catch the killer: a 2007 University of Florida Gators cap that had been left on the floor beside Larry, which didn't belong to any of the employees who were there that day. The police department then summoned the Toys R Us loss prevention expert Bernard Grutza to walk them through viewing whatever security footage existed. While the security cameras had been shut off in the office, they could clearly see the man wearing the Gators hat walking through the store, avoiding the cameras and only showing the top of his hat. Investigators had found usable DNA on the hat and swabbed dozens of employees and potential suspects so that they could compare samples, but were unable to turn up a match. The investigation dragged on for weeks, then months. People in Hamburg began to talk, worrying that someone was going to get away with murder, Cascino recalled. Retracing their steps, investigators realized that they were missing a DNA swab from one person close to the crime, Bernard Grutza. The loss prevention expert had been authorities' go-to guy for help with the investigation, but kept finding excuses for why he didn't have time to be swabbed. Almost 100 days since the murder, authorities cornered Grutza at his house, forcing him to take the swab. Only a few hours later, results came back as a match for the Gators hat. Detectives went to his home immediately and arrested and charged him for murder. While searching his house, authorities found stockpiles of electronics and toys. Grutza was selling the merchandise on eBay and had clearly wanted to silence Larry so that he could continue his operation without anyone finding out, robbing not only Larry Wells of his life, but his wife and children the opportunity to keep their father and husband. When Larry arrived at work in the dark, quiet hours of the early morning, he couldn't have imagined he would soon be fighting for his life in the very store he managed. Nor could he have predicted that one of Larry's own employees would violently and unjustly end his life that day. But as Larry went about his typical opening duties, a sinister plan was unfolding within the Toys R Us walls. A deadly intruder was lurking, poised to attack. Before long, Larry's supportive coworkers would find their beloved manager slumped over in a pool of blood. In just a matter of hours, the Wells family would be shattered and left searching for answers. This devastating homicide would rock an entire community. The tragic murder of Larry Wells highlights just how fragile life can be. His story reminds us to cherish each day, a lesson learned too late for the Toys R Us manager whose promising life was cut short far too soon. Lawrence C. Wells II was born on September 22, 1977 in Dunkirk, New York. Larry, as he was known by friends and family, was described as a shy and quiet child who took some time to open up. But once he did, his warm and helpful nature became clear to those around him. In high school, Larry met his future wife, Jill, and it was love at first sight. Though they were only 15 when they started dating, they were inseparable from the start and just knew they were meant to be together. After graduating, Larry and Jill both attended SUNY Fredonia, where their bond grew even stronger over their 4 years there. After college, Larry earned a degree in elementary education and later obtained his master's degree from Walden University. He began working as a substitute teacher and tutor, allowing him to pursue his passion for educating and bonding with young children. Students who had Larry as a teacher remembered him as kind-hearted and able to connect with each child. His wife, Jill, recalled how he would take under his wing any students who had problems at home, to ensure they had the best experience possible at school. Though Larry loved teaching, the job market was tough and permanent positions scarce. Larry had dreams of financial stability, starting a family, and purchasing a home with Jill. With unsteady teaching jobs, this proved difficult. In 2006, Larry began working at Toys R Us, originally intended as temporary work, while he continued searching for a full-time teaching job. But Larry's friendly and upbeat personality made him well-liked by coworkers and customers alike. Within a few years, Larry had been promoted from store employee to a managerial role. By the time his wife Jill gave birth to their daughter Maddie in 2009, Larry was settled into his manager job, working long hours but always making time for his family when he was off. Larry loved taking Maddie to Chuck E. Cheese, bounce houses, and the park near their home. His childlike spirit allowed him to connect easily with his daughter. Though retail work required many weekends and holidays, Larry remained dedicated to Toys R Us, sacrificing his own time for his family. Around the time of that fateful attack in June 2013, Jill was pregnant again, and the Wells family looked forward to expanding their family. The murder of Larry Well. On the morning of June the 29th, 2013, Larry arrived early as usual at the Toys R Us in Hamburg, New York, to assist in unloading stock and prepping the store for its morning opening. There were four other employees already on duty restocking shelves that morning: Isaac Mallet, Cindy O'Connell, Anthony Armstrong, and Richard Shepard. At around 5:40 a.m., Isaac heard a persistent alarm sound echoing through the store. Annoyed, he radioed manager Larry Wells, asking him to switch it off. When Larry didn't respond, Isaac asked Cindy to go track him down. Moments later, Cindy's screams rang out. The other employees rushed to the manager's office to find Larry slumped over in a chair, covered in blood. Though Cindy initially thought he had been shot, paramedics later determined he had been stabbed 3 times in the chest. By the time Larry arrived at the hospital, it was too late. At just 35 years old, the beloved husband, father, and manager had died from blood loss resulting from his stab wounds. Police immediately eyed the 4 employees as suspects. However, examining security footage revealed that just before 5 a.m., an unknown man snuck into the store wielding a knife and entered Larry's office. He disabled the surveillance system minutes later. It became clear this was not a random burglary, as the perpetrator moved stealthily through the store, avoiding cameras and employees. Police believed Larry had walked in on the intruder in his office, leading to the fatal attack. The only clues were grainy footage of the suspect wearing a mask and black hat and a Florida Gators hat with the suspect's DNA, though it matched no one in databases. Over 2 months, police collected employee DNA samples to compare against the hat. Still no match. It wasn't until over 50 employee samples had been tested that police realized one key figure had not yet given DNA: Bernard Grutza, the regional vice president who had hired Larry himself years prior. Bernard had helped police access security footage the morning of the murder, but he became elusive when they tried scheduling a DNA test, claiming he was distraught and staying with his father. Police soon learned the real story. Bernard's wife had filed a protection order against him and forced him to leave just weeks before Larry's death. He had flown into a violent rage, pushing her and faking his own suicide with a gunshot. Police connected with Bernard at his father's house and finally obtained a DNA sample. 2 months later, results showed Bernard's DNA matched the cap left at the scene. When confronted, Bernard denied involvement but was arrested for Larry's murder. Searching Bernard's home uncovered his motives. Despite his $90,000 salary, he and his wife were over $1 million in debt. To supplement income, he had been stealing and reselling over $200,000 worth of Toys R Us merchandise online. The family of murdered Toys R Us assistant manager Larry Wells will have to wait longer for justice to be served. In state Supreme Court in Buffalo, police believe financial desperation led Bernard to attempt robbing the Hamburg store's safe the morning Larry walked in and met his own demise. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Bernard admitted to stealing, financial crimes, and the attack on Larry. He will serve a minimum of 25 years in prison. For Larry Wells's pregnant wife Jill and young daughter Maddie, the loss was devastating. Larry was Jill's high school sweetheart and soulmate. Maddie adored her father, who doted on her with trips to Chuck E. Cheese in the park. Jill lived in fear until Bernard's arrest, terrified she could be a target with the real killer free. At just 4 years old, Maddie struggled to grasp why her daddy was no longer there to play with her. At a memorial on the anniversary of Larry's death, hundreds gathered to write notes to lost loved ones and release balloons into the sky. It was a beautiful act of community support for a family who lost so much. 35 years was far too short for someone who was so loved as Larry Wells. Though his loss can never be replaced, the legacy he left of compassion and mentorship continues to uplift those who knew him. Larry Wells's story reminds us all to appreciate the time we have with loved ones and live each day to the fullest.